Hi, part threes. I want to do a little introduction to ethics and morality. And it's really hard for me to do this in one chunk, so I'll probably have to do it into two because there's two really important issues I want to talk about in this introduction. And one is just sexuality in general, because this we do focus a lot on sexual ethics in this one, even though we do start off with the topic, what guides my Catholic leadership, and you will be looking at pastoral plans for schools. And then you will end with social justice, but what's in the middle is our sexual ethics, and that is something that is really not understood fully by most Catholics, especially Catholic teachers. When I started St. Michael's, I was the founding chaplain there, and one of the first retreats I did with my staff was the Catholic birds and the bees, and talked about sexual ethics with my staff to help them understand in terms of what we need to communicate and present to our students in terms of our ministry in our classrooms, in our schools. And ethics is huge, and it's not really well understood by Catholics. Just like we don't really know our story, a lot of people don't know what the church really teaches about sexual ethics. So I'm going to start with just sexuality in general. I need to talk about issues of homosexuality and the whole LGBTQ plus community and all the issues that have developed in that over the past 10 years. And then, of course, I would like to end in prayer, and I would like to do the scripture of the day for Tuesday, October 24th, which is the day we start ethics and morality. So let's see how well we do here. I'm going to try to explain this. I'm going to try to get to the point, but it's really hard. And so at any point, if something I've said or I'm saying doesn't sit right with you, and you're like, what's she saying? I don't agree with her, or she's making me angry. Stop it right there and email me or give me a call, because maybe I need to explain things a little differently here. But I totally am trying to explain what the church teaches here. And part of what's happening in our church is there's really, we haven't really fully understood and unpacked Vatican Council II. And just that's what I mentioned in my last video, that this document over 50 years ago is the last ecumenical council for the church. And to this day, it's hard for our church to be aligned, even in terms of where the church is in terms of its own teachings. And part of that is because of ethics and morality. A lot of people have a hard time with what the church teaches in terms of this, because it teaches the whole idea of an informed conscience. And if you look in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it's all in here. There's a section on morality. There's a section on homosexuality. Moral conscience is in Article 6. And it explains everything in terms of what the church teaches. But, when you're trying to explain informed conscience to some people understand it as moral relativism. So, with Vatican II, prior to Vatican II, sorry, I'm going to say, pretty much it was, yes or no. This is what you do, this is what you don't do. And there was really no gray area in there. You're either right or you're wrong, and there were consequences. But with Vatican II, it kind of widened things, and there's a bit of a gray area in there, because in our church now, we are called to go through a process of search. So just like with Vatican II, we were told to read scripture, to read it for ourselves and not just have someone else read it and interpret it for us. The same thing with making our moral decisions. Like, it's work. Like, in order to do a proper formation of conscience, it means we need to understand what the church teaches and not just sit there with the checklist of what the church says yes and no to. We need to do that discernment. And so a lot of people are uncomfortable with that concept with the church because, because they feel people can kind of justify, their decisions. But, in any capacity, people can do that, So I like the challenge of Vatican II. I like the fact that it's making us learn what the church teaches and go through that process of search. So when hopefully you've learned about moral decision formation of conscience already. So the part of that is to pray, to go talk to someone, like someone who knows something about the church, to go talk to your priest and talk to your family. Read what others are saying. It's so easy now, access information on the internet, and to really understand, like, even though I'm going to make a decision that doesn't align itself with the church, you know, is this, you know, what I believe is good for me? So in the Catholic Catechism in 1782, so that's the paragraph, it's not the page, right? So in any capacity of the Catechism, if you look at 1782, it says here, man has the right to act in conscience and in freedom so as personally to make moral decisions. He must not be forced to act contrary to his conscience. But that's a formed conscience, meaning this conscience has gone through a process of search and research and discernment and prayer and discussion and, you know, talking to the right authority figures, right? Nor must he be prevented from acting according to his conscience, especially in religious matters. So ultimately, the church is saying we have to follow our conscience. But it can't be a scapegoat to say, well, I'm just following my conscience. But what did you do to form that conscience? That's the tricky part. And that's where we can, you know, that's where moral relativism comes into question, right? Because moral relativism is like, I'm doing what feels good for me. That's not formation of conscience. That's not a process of search. Excuse me. That's just saying, hey, I'm going to do whatever I want to do, and I think it's okay. No, that's not morality. Okay. So that's what we need to really kind of understand. The starting point, and the excuse me, the starting point for the church for ethics and morality is the dignity of human life. And this is, let's talk about sexuality in the context of that. First of all, the church is not going to move as fast as the secular world and companies and all that kind of stuff. Like, you know, I gave the example of Apple, the last time Apple 10. Well, you know, this is Vatican II. Vatican II since, you know, 1963 to 65. And that's it. Like, we haven't had Vatican III, Vatican IV, Vatican V, it's not going to move that fast. Like, it'll probably take us another 50 years, if not more, to fully live out this document and to understand fully what it means for us in terms of being a church. So, you know, we need to slow down in terms of that. And it doesn't mean the church is slow or backwards. It's because the church is taking into consideration the dignity of human life. And the church does do research. Like, it's not just, the church is not just a bunch of theologians sitting around in the Vatican library, you know, blowing off the dust of old manuscripts and just dissecting scripture. Like, for example, the Jesuits, and the Pope's a Jesuit, they're really out there in the world. There's different orders that do different things in the world, right? And for example, Father Rob Allure is a Jesuit that I had known in my past. I used to come in and be a guest speaker in my grade 12 religion classes. And he's a full-time Jesuit priest, but he also worked, he's now, I think, out in BC. He worked at Mount Sinai Hospital on the Genome Project. So he's a scientist. So we've got priests that are scientists, doctors, researchers, lawyers. They're out there in the world doing all kinds of stuff in the secular world, but trying to bring that the sacred into the secular, if that makes any sense. And that's what we're supposed to do as Catholic educators as well, is to find that balance and try to bring the sacred into the secular, because in reality we're living in a secular world. So how do we find the sacred in it? That's our challenge, right? So when we deal with issues of sexuality, I gotta move quickly here. Wow, we are sexual beings. So our sexuality is a gift, right? We're not going to take that part out of us, even though we're not comfortable with our own sexuality, right? We're physical beings. We got a body. We got to deal with our bodies, our minds, our emotions, our, you know, psychology, our, you know, all that kind of stuff. And we are sexual. And that gift is our sexuality. You know, that's an incredible gift that God has given us. But that gift also has a huge responsibility. Because by God making us sexual, he has made us co-creators with God. So God has basically entrusted us with the way God designed us, that we continue human life and to continue the work that God did. Huge responsibility. So the tough part is that our sexuality is a source of pleasure and a means to express our greatest love with another human being. But it also bears incredible responsibility, because in the process of our own sexual pleasure and our most intimate acts of love, we also can create life. And even if we're using contraception, it's not foolproof. So we can create human life. So whether we're 13, 23, 33, 43, 53, anytime we have sex, we have to ask ourselves, are we ready at this moment in our lives to take responsibility for the creation of new life? That's the question we have to ask. And so that's where the church then starts to put the whole concept of our sexual ethics into the teachings of the church, you know? So at what point is a human being responsible enough to be less selfish, because we are selfish, especially, you know, when we're young, we think about ourselves. At what point are we willing to be less selfish, give to another human being, start being responsible, start trying to create some sort of stable existence, meaning, you know, buying a house, having the mortgage, you know, taking that responsibility? It's in marriage, traditionally. That's where human beings kind of gravitated their lives towards, right? So that's the context in which the church puts its teachings on sexuality into marriage, right? Because it's at that point we made a commitment to another human being that we love, you know, and when you love, you're less selfish, you're willing to sacrifice to another human being, and that's the context in which you want to bring another life, to have a good life, to be dignified in the life that you are going to create. That's what it is. It's, church is not just being a party pooper and telling you you can't have sex. But that's difficult in this day and age, because you know, we're living in a time in history where adolescence is fairly new. It's basically in the turn of the century that we've developed this stage in life that's adolescence. You know, you look back to the story of Mary, and when she gave birth to Jesus, she was really a teenager. She was like 13 or something, right? That's when, you know, the puberty kicks in and the body tells you you're ready to have sex, you know? But in this day and age where we have education, we've extended that time where, you know, our young people should not be having sex, but that's, you know, and it's in those years, especially in high school, but it's starting earlier and earlier because of, you know, the way hormones are today. We're asking them to not act out on their natural urges, to be responsible, and to sit down and focus and be good students and be good people. And it's like swimming upstream sometimes, especially when the secular gospel that's being proclaimed is telling them to be sexual all the time, starting at a very early age. And those of you who teach elementary, you could see the kids are being very sexual even before they understand what sexuality is, before they even get their first hormone, so to speak. They're already being put into that, you know, sexual identity. So it's tough. You know, and the way life is now, people are having a hard time getting started in life, so people aren't getting married right out of high school. They're continuing their education. They're trying to launch their careers. People aren't getting married till their late 20s, early 30s, sometimes close to their 40s. Hello, I'm 53, I'm still waiting. But anyways, you know, and is it fair to say that, you know, you can't have sex till you get married? What if you never get married? What if, you know, there's all kinds of scenarios. Are you a bad person? You know, and I was gonna, when I teach this face-to-face, I always do this in a sort of a humorous way, you know, the bride coming into the groom and the bride coming into the church. Is there sort of like one of those, you know, detectors like at the airport, and are they gonna walk through? Is it gonna detect your virginity, you know? No, you know, like, you know, how many Catholics are getting married in the Catholic Church that are not virgins, you know? So our sort of issues about sexuality and stuff has really been challenged over the years, you know, in terms of the way society has developed. And how do our church teachings apply to that? So we as Catholic educators really have to give our students the alternate message, which is the right message of dignity, of waiting, of being patient, of dignifying themselves, of the health of their sexuality. The statistics are out there. Just do the research. When they start having sex at an early age, it impacts them later in life, psychologically, physically, sexually. It's not good for them. So we're not supposed to play along with that message. We're supposed to give them the other message that is healthy for them, that gives them permission not to be sexual. Because a lot of times they feel they have to be because everyone else is. The pressure's there, the messages are there, and they feel under pressure. That's not fair to our young people, and we should be giving them a healthy message. Part 2.